Good afternoon. Welcome to the Morrisville Town Council work session. It's continued discussion of the transportation plan update. I'm going to pass to Planner Courtney Tanner at this time to help facilitate our discussions.
Good evening, Council. As in the past, I'm going to have Ben provide an overview, starting with Chapter 5 this evening. If we are able to make it through Chapter 5, we will continue on to the appendices, any of the appendices that we have not covered to date. But we're going to basically provide an overview as before, and then we'll go into the follow-up items that we received when we published the agenda. Any items that we received after that are not included in the presentation, but I'm more than happy to start covering those as well. So I'll turn it over to Ben.
All right. So Action 5 consists of the action plan for the transportation plan. It starts off with a section on transportation funding and incorporates conclusions from the Blue Ribbon Committee on Transportation Funding. And then it goes into the action plan, which discusses existing policies and programs, as well as policies or programs currently under development, and then moves on with recommendations for new policies or programs prioritized by near-term and mid-term, and then also roadway intersection multi-use path project prioritization, again split out near-term, mid-term, and long-term. And it does, in all these prioritizations, it connects the guiding principles to the prioritization and includes the independent multi-use path project prioritization and, as I mentioned, the roadway facility improvement prioritization. Changes from 2009 plan, it incorporated recommendations from Blue Ribbon Commission on Transportation Funding report that was completed in 2013-2014 time. It also includes a modified prioritization list of recommended policies or programs, and it establishes separate prioritization tables for roadways and multi-use path projects.
Okay, so moving on to the questions and comments from previous work sessions. Really the first one is really to take a look at Table 5-6. And specifically recommended policies and programs, and then we're going to provide feedback on those. At the last work session, I provided each of you with a table with some spreadsheets, and one of those spreadsheets included everything from the table, as well as some questions to basically ask. So, Mayor, I think probably at this point the most appropriate thing is for everybody to refer to their worksheets and start asking the questions from their worksheets so we can go ahead and check number 1 off this list. So I will turn it back over to you.
Okay. Does anyone need a copy of the worksheets, or does everyone have them? Okay, so I guess we just do it one page at a time. Does anyone have anything on page 1 of Table 5.6 that they want to question, edit, have any questions about or suggestions? Councilmember Johnson?
So I'm going to make a quick comment about the header on the table itself. And if I've already said this, we've talked about these things so many times I can't remember if I said this before or not, but on the top of Table 5.6 where it says, and the header, it says near-term recommendations, can we just add in there what near-term means, that it means 15 years or less? Isn't that what we're, less than 15 years? Can we just put that in the header so people don't, sometimes people just look at a chart and they don't go back and read through the meat of the chapter. So I just thought that might be
I think that'd be helpful for all of them, even the midterm and the long term, just have a year associated with them. Does the rest of the council feel like that would be helpful, or Mayor Pro Tem?
So just a question about near term. I always thought it's less than 5. Maybe we should define short term, near term, long term, somewhere in the document itself, and then in these headers, I agree, we should define that as well. Because this is a living document, should we define what that range of 15 years is? Because we are going to formally adopt a new plan in another, 9 years, hopefully, making it 10 years in, progression.
So can I just tag on to that? Because one of my questions was, what is our priority in that 15 years? Because I agree. These are all really important projects, and that's one of the questions I had was, are these in some kind of priority order? Or are we just going to tackle these as funding becomes available? Or how are we going to handle that in these 15 years?
So any items that are not part of an active CIP are not prioritized other than the broad categories, recognizing that we did end up with no long-term items. Everything was kind of near or mid when revisions were made. We had talked about kind of re-alphabetizing, so it would be near, and then ultimately it's going to be alphabetized as well. Just based off of previous conversations, that's how we were reorganizing the tables, where ABC order is appropriate, and this is one of those ones where you can get it because it's not prioritized. This is the opportunity for everybody to take a look at, have we categorized them correctly, yes or no? So for example, if you see something that's in the near term that you strongly feel should be long-term or mid-term, this is when you start having those conversations. In many ways, it doesn't much matter. I will say near-term only matters if we all know it's a funded project or a funded initiative. That's the only time that I think near-term truly matters. It's then setting priorities. Now, how does it get implemented in as part of the budget? As part of the annual budget, through that process, we will bring items that we believe that staff has the capacity to handle, and clearly we're going to start with the near-term items first. Caveat to that is, say something may be identified as mid or long-term, but suddenly funding for that specific item is made available, and we will lose out on X dollars if we don't provide a match or if we don't move forward on that project now. And then we would come back and have those conversations with councils. We have opportunity X. Even though it's identified as long-term, do you want to take advantage of it? And here are the criteria to do that. So that's where we have to be somewhat flexible. But from the standpoint of staff, identifying items to bring forward in the budget, we're going to focus on the ones that are achievable and that we can manage. So there's going to be a couple of criteria that we will use internally. So for example, we've already started working on this transit study. We've we're currently reviewing proposals. It may identify things that are not even in here. So when we come back and update that, as we said we would, there may be changes that have to then again be made too. I don't think it's unreasonable to say that we remove things that we've accomplished and add a new appendix of accomplished items and add things. I mean, that's the purpose of this document, is to update it annually as needed. So I'd say when you're making your decisions, decide what you think is most appropriate now, understanding that information needs may change and it always can be modified.
Okay, so that was very helpful, sort of reviewing the general timetable and how we're actually going to move forward once we have this plan in place. So that was very helpful, but getting back to the question, is the council okay with adding the words less than 15 years after near-term recommendations in that header, just to make it clear so someone who's only looking at the table sort of understands that's the time frame. So I'm seeing some head nods for that. And I suggest we also do it 15 to 24 years for midterm where appropriate, things like that. Okay, so right now we're still on page 1. Are there any policy or program recommendations there that people have questions about, want to edit, or feel that should be either mid or long term? Okay, seeing none, we'll just turn the page to page 2. So there's 5 items there. Does anyone have any questions or suggestions about the items on page 2 of table 5.6? Things that should be moved or that we need more information before incorporating them into the plan? Okay, seeing none, moving to page 3 of that one. I actually had something for this one. I was hoping that we might replace the term curvilinear with something a little less technical, something that's a little more explanatory that would actually add value to the text of the first bicycle and pedestrian one. Like, why does things in a curvilinear manner, how does that actually affect what we're trying to do and accomplish? Is there a different option that we could sort of provide for that?
Thank you for providing the email in advance. It was helpful. So Ben and Dylan really went through the plan itself and started taking a look at some of your comments. In this particular instance, we do recommend, because that is the actual description of what is occurring here with our current development patterns. So we don't recommend making the change. Part of these policy statements are going to be somewhat technical in nature, but that's because there's a point to it from the standpoint of we have a technical need that needs to occur. So we don't recommend departing from the language in this particular instance.
Case, would it be possible to sort of expand on it and sort of explain what curvilinear development means and how it actually affects our ability to improve the infrastructure that we're trying to improve?
Ben, are you fine with adding more term or clarifying the terminology within the action item itself?
Yeah, we can do that.
Is the rest of council okay with that, as long as it doesn't get too much in the weeds there?
I would just make it a note at the end, and that way it wouldn't impact the statement itself. It would just be like an additional bit of information.
Like curvilinear in the glossary or something? Or?
No, I would make it a note at the end of the section, just so that the statement reads correctly technically, because we do have people that are following that in alignment with the law and the policies that we make.
Either one is fine from our standpoint. If we added it as a note, it would end up being at the very end, but normal it'd be kind of bookmarked or bracketed with a 1 and then kind of go into the end of that. We do that. Or, as we're doing with some others, we can make sure it has a hyperlink to it that then takes it to the glossary itself. Either way, we're fine. It's whatever council as a whole prefers. Either approach is completely appropriate.
I think the note right within the table would work best for me, for those actually looking at hard copy. Is council okay with that? Sure. Okay. Okay. Did anyone have anything else on Councilmember Garamella on page 3?
Page 3. The last point include the construction of curb and gutter and street trees. We have, I think when we compare ourselves with Cary, Cary has a median with trees on it, right? And when just if you look at Town Hall Drive, we just have a median and no, trees in the middle. But Cary demands that to have it, and that you can clearly see how their street landscape versus our landscape. So should we align ourselves, because when you have streets interlining, you suddenly see there's no tree requirement, and then again in the median you're getting trees.
Well, NCDOT will define it for both of us for NCDOT streets. And this is really about then developing a policy. We would make it consistent with our plan itself. So one, we need to clearly define what median streetscaping, and all that would happen as a result of this. So one, we would need to define it, and two, we would make sure it happened for all town projects. That's the heart of what this is getting at. So we currently have in the UDO lots of designs for non-medians, and there are some basic design parameters in here, but we could take it a step further. So that's the heart of what this is getting at. Exactly what you're saying is having that clarity and then potentially consistency as well.
Plan to have trees, because from my understanding, it's not mandatory for us.
The purpose of this is to make it mandatory. Is to basically, because right now it's optional, but this is to include the construction of curb, gutter, and street trees in all projects. So the heart of this is making it mandatory that for town projects, if there's a median, that we're not just installing grass. Understanding sometimes we can only install grass. For example, in 54, there's a large grass median near Duke Medical. It's grass because there's a utility line in there and you cannot put trees in, but then we can come up with other standards as well. But this also gets into increasing maintenance cost, so there's a lot of factors that we just want to make sure that everybody understands, and that would all be part of that policy when it's developed.
Good. Okay. Anything else on that page 3? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to table 5.6, page 4. I had a couple on this. In the table, the first time that EDCM appears, I was hoping that we might be able to put in brackets engineering, design, construction manual, just so people would know what that stood for. Hopefully everyone already knows what UDO is. That was in the second item. And then for access management, the fourth item. Well, let's finish the first one first.
So the first one, we are adding hyperlinks to all acronyms that will take us to the glossary. So the glossary defines all of our acronyms, but acronyms are used consistently throughout the document, because in theory, when you're writing, it would only appear in the very first spot and never appear again. So to ensure that we're following appropriate grammar rules, we've decided to put all acronyms as well as definitions really in the in Appendix A, and then hyperlink it to there. So if the person's reading it, since everything's online, there would be a little hover button, they'd click that, and it would take them directly to the definition. And that's how we're proposing to handle it document-wide.
Okay, just my thought that sometime in the future, we might just be handing out printouts of these. So there may be just hard copy in the future. So that would be my concern, that we may or may not be only online in the future.
And if that were the case, then we need to change everywhere that EDCM to engineering, design, construction manual throughout the entire document then. Because if we're just going to print out occasional sheets, I can't even guarantee that EDCM would be on that particular sheet that we're handing out. They could print out the fourth page of a table and not the first page where it appears. My recommendation is to use the current pattern that we're having with the hyperlinks, or as an alternative, remove all acronyms into the entire document, but that's going to be a fair amount of work.
I would rescind my request. Councilmember Johnson?
I was just going to say, I think more and more folks are going online to look at their information. I don't think many people are requesting hard copies of things. I could be wrong, but I think to make sure the online copy is easy for people to use and use hyperlinks, I think is the way to go. So.
Okay, seeing head nods on that one. I also had a suggestion for consideration for number 4, when appropriate, consider implementation of access management strategies. For those of people who are just seeing only the table, it might be helpful to add some examples of what access management means, like turn lanes, right in, right out, medians, etc. For people who, does anyone have any thoughts about that, Courtney?
We could do two things. One, we can say kind of in parentheses for details, see, chapter 3 and hyperlink it back to that chapter so that it's in there, and just use hyperlinks as our mechanism on how to link people to different directions. So it's easy to hyperlink back to chapter headers. So that's an option.
Sounds like a good way to connect the information. Okay, great. Then I had one last one. And it's also sort of hyperlinkish, so that I take that one back. Councilmember Schlink and Councilmember Rao, other items on page 4.
Sorry I was delayed. I question procedurally, I think there were slides put out for this, right? To the public, 1 through 50 or 45?
There was, we have the presentation that's up here, but we're actually right now going through the table that Courtney had handed out the last council meeting.
I got that. Are we going to go over the slides too?
Yes, we're on item number 1 on the screen.
Okay.
5.6, this is just a supplement that I handed to y'all last time to help
And
with
I've
the
looked at it.
discussion
Okay,
of this one.
Just double checking, I'm sorry.
Yes, we are going through that.
Okay, then backtrack a little. I mean, I'm just trying to, I see this, I had some questions about, just in general, like the page we just talked about, when we do implementation or access management strategies, for one. Is there anything for the public or anything for the officials to understand how you evaluate that? When I look back and I see figure 5.1, the summary evaluation matrix that we have for the state funding, I kind of like that, for something like that to show. I know we're doing the little circles and you're identifying most of these have 3, but does that mean that, and you don't have to answer it now, but I'm sure we're going to get into it when we prioritize these things in the next slide. I'm just trying to understand how we get to that. The evaluation techniques or matrix we're looking at to do all this stuff when we evaluate something.
I'm happy to answer, and you, I think you probably walked in when we were probably covering this. So the way that it's working now is, about 2 is 1. This would be updated annually. So at this point, we are going to go through, decide what we think is most appropriate based off of today, and then there can be continued updates annually. For staff, we will identify as part of the project projects that can be managed, and we will start with the near term first. So we'll go through, identify near-term items that can be handled, can be funded, and they'll be brought through the budget for council to determine whether or not to fund those items for the next year. And as we execute items through the annual update, that's where we'll add a new appendix most likely. This says tasks that council's accomplished. And then can add more items to new, mid, or long term as well. The other thing to that is, I said, this is where you're going to have some exceptions. You may have a mid or long-term item that suddenly funding's available through the state, and we would come back to council and say, hey, we recognize this is not a near-term item. However, we're being offered X dollars. Here are the parameters. Do we add money to it? Is it usually there's a contribution on the town. Are you interested in moving forward on something that's identified as long-term simply because of the funding? And again, you're part of that decision making basis. But a lot of these require additional funding that would be allocated through the annual budget.
I think I'm just trying to make it a little more transparent for the public, because when they see these, I know I did the guiding principles, it's kind of like, well, which one outweighs which? I mean, we kind of did that early on. We decided, and it's individually they're making a decision. I'm trying to make it less subjective, more consistent, so that I think it's more predictable. But that's just me. I understand. I think you guys are covering it. I'll switch really quick then to something, and Councilmember Wendell isn't here, but I wanted to bring it up at monorail. He's brought this up a couple times. Do we want to put something in here, and this might be the appropriate thing to do policy, a proposed program recommendation on a monorail?
Yes. So once we get to the end of the table, are we missing something? It's going to be one of those questions we're going to have to ask. And if that's one of the items we're missing, we need to go ahead and talk about it and talk about adding it. And then once we decide, yes, we're going to add a policy, let's say there's consensus that we're going to add, evaluate, implementing a monorail. Then you'd have to define what your term is for it. Is it a near, mid, or long-range item? And so, yes, we are going to get to that. And I don't think and that probably won't be the only one that we're going to be talking about.
And will that come under this one, or will it come under slides? That's all. I'm just trying to figure out. We have a lot of slides.
We're on evaluating table 5.6, and if it's any item that you would like to add to 5.6, I say let's capture it under number 1 right now.
Thank you.
Councilmember Rao?
My point is on support effort. Are we allowed to go scroll down on any point that we want to make that's on this list on page? I left my other copy at home. I was in such a rush to get over here.
That's fine, just as long as we can all identify which one you're talking about.
Okay. Support efforts by partner agencies to promote intelligent transportation systems and transportation demand management improvements.
Okay, so that's the bottom one of page 4 of the bigger handout.
Yeah.
But yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, yeah. So I just want to just bring this point up. We talk about utilizing advanced technology. Courtney, we talked about referencing in the transportation plan emerging technologies, smart technologies. So I don't know whether there's language that could be added or just something to keep in mind, because this assumes that the town's going to work with Triangle J, Campo, and DOT, but I would like us to have something in there just for the public that we want to encourage, entrepreneurs or people that have ideas. We recently had high school kids come and talk about transportation-related issues, and they presented, Councilmember Wendell invited them to town hall. So I don't know whether we could add language or just for the record, I just wanted people who are listening tonight to know that, we want your ideas. Liz Johnson always makes the point that we can't pave our way out of the problem, and a lot of our focus is on road widening projects. But I really like this idea of transportation management, developing solutions that take cars off the road. So I just want to say that for the record.
And we do, on discussion, I don't know if we're going to get to it this evening, but Appendix G, one of the follow-up items we had from our November 27th work session was to discuss if additional strategies are needed for Table G1, and it's related to smart technology options. And that most likely was a follow-up to the overall discussion that we had about making sure we're looking at all partners at that meeting. If there's additional items that you want added to the current policy statement we have in here, we can add additional things as well. That's up for discussion, but Table G1 also kind of gets to the heart of what you're talking about.
I'll hold off on adding any language. I just thought we could add something like town should continue to work cooperatively with, I don't know what word you would use though. I'm just trying to, maybe we don't have to mention it. I just wanted to have some language in there that would show that, in addition to just, what the bodies of government have ideas on advanced technology, we want to leverage on technology folks out there. We're living in such a technology, such a tech-savvy population in Morrisville that we want to encourage those citizens to be able to come forth with ideas. And maybe that's implied in this statement.
Would you be okay if we just added private industry partners to the end of that?
That would be good.
Would that be okay to sort of leave that open to other public-private partnerships? Council be okay with that? Adding that at the end of Campo? Other outside entities?
Other private entities.
Public or private entities? Is that pretty much
Staff
covers the kitchen sink?
that, yes.
Okay. I don't see anyone having a problem with that, so thanks for that addition. Was there anything else on page 4? Okay. Councilmember Garamella?
This particular same point there, promote intelligent transportation. I don't know, where will the charging stations be incorporated? Because it's kind of go green, intelligent, or, trying to get better air quality. I think to my knowledge, we have only one charging station. So is that part that we can incorporate any of the public parks or anywhere that we can have charging stations?
Quick search, and Ben, correct me, I don't believe we have a specific policy regarding charging stations. I know we've talked about it, but I couldn't find one either.
Do we have any language to promote?
I'm sorry, Mayor, I cut you off, and I apologize.
I was cutting you off. I apologize. Do we have any language in there to promote charging stations in any way, shape, or form?
I was going to take it one step further and say add a policy. So if you get kind of to the end, so now we have monorail, now we have charging stations. Maybe these are 2 policies then that we add at the end. Identify locations. You can take create a policy on where charging stations are installed on town facilities. Do we always install them, all new projects? Those are things that we can add a policy in here, or to basically develop a policy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, not just town, especially if there's a new development coming in, and if they can have a public charging station there as part of the whole thing.
If they want them, our code allows them. We do not prohibit them, so anybody can build them now. We did try to have some requirements in a sustainability section as part of the UDO, but we truly struggle from the standpoint we don't have a sustainability plan here for the town. And so we were having a hard time coming up with criteria. There's a lot of more other criteria that were difficult with the point system that we were working on. Because we were asked questions of, so you expect us to fund for free? And I was like, well, you can also charge people, just like you do at a gas station. You do have those options with the stations. But no, we could definitely identify something to talk about developing policy for the town. If there's, agreement on that direction. And then we can explore, code language. I just think it's going to be a bit of a challenge based off of or others until we have a definitive sustainability plan that applies to both the private and public realm.
And the last is the new library. Usually all the Wake County libraries have a charging station. Do you know if this particular one has one?
Off the top of my head, I can't tell you because I didn't review the plan in that finite detail. I do know they have a lot of green initiatives in it. I can look into it and get the answer back, though, to council. I'll email an answer to all of council.
Okay. Anyone have anything else on page 4? Okay. Moving on to page 5. I had the one that begins with ensure design standards, the first one. It seems like most of the text is talking about safety. So I was thinking, is it possible, or would we like to change the first sentence to say, ensure design standards to maintain pedestrian safety when building large medians? Does staff have a thought about that before council discusses?
So the policy statement, although it references safety, it really was intended to ensure pedestrians are actively using the crossings, and safety is a component of that. If there's tweaking we felt it was all incorporated in there, but we're open to talk about it some.
Bertem, please.
That makes sense. Safety is a sub of the overall activity, and there could be multiple types of activity, and we want them to use the same ways. Thanks.
Okay, I'm seeing nods on that, so we don't need to make any changes to that one. Does anyone have any other of those 6 bullets on page 5? Did anyone have any other questions or suggestions or amendments? Okay. Seeing none, moving to page 6, the final page. Mayor Pro Tem Scroggins Johnson, please, page 6.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to wait until page 6 to talk about the transit items. I know that we haven't expanded the transit section for this particular plan. However, it's just such an important topic. The first page on page number 5 talks about our engagement at the county level, identifying future and potential routings through Morrisville. On page 6, we talk about studying potential stops, ridership, locations, etc. And then the last item is advocating and providing. So I think we need to expand the last item and have some language in there about funding, because the first sentence says we need to support, enhance fixed route and express bus service. And I just want to first clarify, express bus service could include on-demand bus service, perhaps?
No. Under Wake Transit, their express bus service is really considered more the peak hour service between, say, Chapel Hill and Raleigh.
Okay. So thank you for that clarification. So could I then ask a question about on-demand bus service? Is that offered in the county? Is that something that we could consider as a prerequisite to establishing routes? Because we don't have data right now.
Right, and that's part of the reason we're doing the public transportation study, is to get that data and figure out what the best solution for the town is as far as transit specifically for the town. regarding your question about on-demand service, Wake County does offer on-demand service. We are technically not in their general public coverage area because of some rule changes that happened a couple of years ago regarding where they can cover. However, with every fixed route transit route that is added or that touches Morrisville, there's a federal requirement for those agencies to also provide on-demand or ADA service within a quarter, I believe it's within a quarter mile of that route. So as Go Carry places their Weston route in service, parts of Morrisville will now become eligible to receive their on-demand or their ADA service. As Go Triangle changes their fixed route service to cover more of Morrisville residents will become eligible to access their on-demand service or ADA service. So there is going to be an inherent expansion of on-demand service in Morrisville as we get more fixed route service. But as far as specifically on-demand service specifically for Morrisville, that's one of the options that will be explored as part of the public transportation study.
Okay, so just to be clear, the study potential routing, stop locations, et cetera, that's where we could explore on-demand routings. Is that something that we can use the term in that section? I just see this, data analytics is so popular, and when you gather data, you make better decisions. And to establish a fixed route service without really knowing where our ridership is, a study could do something, but I'd really like to see some actual ridership usage, and on-demand would give us at least a little bit. So I don't know if that could be built into the study or built into this language that we could explore potential routes using on-demand preliminarily.
Well, I mean, it will be built into the study. I mean, we're purposefully trying to keep the study as broad as possible and to examine all options, including on-demand and even TNCs, the transportation network companies like Lyft and Uber. So with our study, where the goal of that is to get a lot of data in the study and have a couple of different recommendations coming forth in that study of here's what the town can do, here's some potential costs. Granted, we won't be able to necessarily get on the ground data as far as this is how many people are utilizing it now. With what you're speaking about, I mean, if you wanted to add in some sort of policy recommendation about on-demand transit, we certainly could. It's sort of baked into what we're already doing with the study, though.
So, yes, Courtney.
I was going to say, I think and I was just looking through the goals. So I think we've covered basically fixed route, and we're covering, kind of other route options. But maybe it's worthwhile us adding, evaluating, having, this on-demand service as another policy. And just so then when we've gone through and we've evaluated all three options in theory and provided financials for all three options, we're now accomplishing three goals. So, I mean, we can either modify one of these or add another one. So we're either expanding one to accomplish three things or adding a third one to accomplish three things. My personal preference is if we're heading this direction and there's support for it, to add a third. Looks like we're accomplishing even more, and then we can ultimately replace all three with something else. But, I mean, that's really up to council. That's my preference, is just to add a third if that's the direction we're going to go.
I mean, that's what my proposal is, because many communities do use on-demand, and it's for, it is for general population, but it is also for specific populations such as seniors or people that cannot drive and want to have access to food stores and medical care and other critical services that they need. And they may not be able to walk to a designated route or a stop, and this provides that interim service. We can explore it. If it does not seem feasible, then we can always determine not to continue. But at least if we start, we can gather some data and make informed decisions. I did want to go into the last item then. There is language in there. It talks about town staff and elected officials should advocate for expanded service. I fully support that. However, there needs to be something that relates to the provide in the header, and the provide to me means funding or money or some sort of actual support. It's good to advocate, but we need to put some something behind those words. And that would be a sentence between the expanded service and the additionally support for provided. So I'm not sure how we can term that delicately so that we don't commit funds, because this is a 15-year plan, but we do need to say that in addition to advocating, we want to provide support as, to promote that. That's it. Thanks.
So you have two things. One, about exploring on-demand service. I'm going to park it till the very end of item number 1 up here, just to put it with the other two that we talked about. But really, I think at this point, you're talking about, to advocate and provide for the expansion of bus service townwide, which is the last item before we get to our midterm recommendations. The question for council is, do you want to refine the text to say, and I don't know if we're going to say provide funding, but, think of however you want to term it. But do y'all want to add emphasis on making sure it's providing, not just advocating? I think is really, if I'm following what you're saying, advocate we're already doing, but now we have to take the next step and provide. And whether that's trying to get resources from other agencies, research funding, that's providing can happen in a lot of different ways. So is there a general direction to make sure that we're modifying this particular item to include provide?
Councilmember Johnson.
So I'm trying to figure out, you want to say provide or provide support for? I get those are two different things, I guess.
I saw the word advocate, and we're advocating today, but in 15 years, if we're still advocating, I think we missed the mark.
You could change it to advocate and provide support for expansion of bus service. That's just one word that we could add to it. If everybody feels that is an important thing.
It seems fine to everybody. It seems a little stronger. Did anyone else have anything on page 6? I had an additional suggestion. The midterm recommendations, generally throughout the plan, that means 15 to 24 years. And I would say that maybe we can take all 3 of these midterm recommendations and try to be a little bit more proactive about just move them into the near term. And obviously, as Ms. Tanner was saying in the past, that if we get funding for something, obviously it's going to move right up. But I'd like to sort of show a little bit more commitment to these last 3 items by making them also near term and keeping them on our radar in the shorter term. Does anyone have any thoughts for or against making all 3 of those near term? Member Johnson.
So no, but then why do we have any other categories at all? Everything is going to be in the near-term recommendation, which is fine.
Right, for this table, for like roadways, I imagine there's still going to be some in the midterm. But for this table, it would be essentially making it all near-term recommendations to be very clear. Ben, yes.
Sorry. Another option council could consider, which would require a little bit more additional work, but create a separate near, mid, and long-term designation for policies. We used the same definition for near, mid, and long for both policies and projects in this current draft. You could change it to where policies near, mid, and long are shorter time periods, whereas the projects are further out. But then you would have to figure out what those time periods would be, and also if you want to reprioritize the projects the policies into those new things. Or we could remove near, mid, and long completely and just have policy recommendations.
I would suggest for this iteration, just removing the time frame, and then maybe the next time through when we're amending, we can put a little bit more meat on the bone and sort of sub-prioritize into smaller chunks like 5, 10, 15 years rather than 15 and above, et cetera. Is that acceptable to the rest of the council? So for right now, everything would be just policy recommendations. Okay, thank you, Mr. Howell. That was a good suggestion. Councilmember Rao.
Question. Just want to take it back to the transit. I completely agree with Mayor Pro Tem that we need to, focus on, really focusing on advocacy for funding. But is it implied who we're advocating to? Because as I look at, recently we had some Go Triangle presentations, and I was a little bit disappointed that there wasn't as much immediate bus service. And Councilmember Wendell and I have had discussions about how this can be a strategy going into our next retreat of looking at where we can invest in transit, take cars off the road. So are we just saying advocate? I'm a little concerned that it's so general. Who are we advocating to? Should we have some language in there, or is it just implied that we're advocating to any transportation agency?
I think that after we have, so this is one of those ones that I think we're going to be able to partially check off after the current project's underway, our public transportation project. Once we have the report prepared, it's going to say what services, how would you fund the services. And then at that point, I think that's going to define potentially who we start advocating for. And I think different routes, we may advocate for one person to handle some routing in the town, and you may advocate for somebody else to handle other routing in the town. For example, we have Go Carry that will be picking up part of our service, and we have it's Go Triangle, I think, picking up part of our service now. So I think unless we move to a Go Morrisville option, I think we're going to advocate to different people as appropriate to ensure that we do that. It's not defined now, but I think we will get that definition, which would then cause us to revise that particular policy. Right now, I think we're advocating on behalf of the citizens, whoever we can get to come here. I think it's and it will change itself. I do think what you have is a lot of merit to it. I just don't know that I have a good answer to give you right now as who we're advocating for, because we have to have more information to define clearly who we need to partner with.
Councilmember Wendell, then Councilmember Garamella.
So, just a point, I understand with regard to near-term, mid-term, and long-term, I think I would be looking for staff recommendation to be able to offer to council what can we do so that we can get some form of public transportation sooner than later. I don't want a study that's going to go on for 5 years, and then we say, or 3 years, and then we say, and now we're going to start advocating for public transportation, and then it's going to be another year, and then we're going to look for funding sources, so that's 2 more years from now. So I think what I would like to have, and again, I'm asking for help because I don't know how necessarily to get this, is of all of the different options, what would it take for us to be able to do something so that we could provide something to the citizens of Morrisville in the short term and then grow from that. So we can get something in place, even if it's minor routes to the most populated areas, but then we can expand, because doing that, we at least have, we've got our foot in the door now, and we've really invested, into a true belief rather than this idea of one day, possibly after a bunch of studies, bringing public transportation to town.
Yeah, so the one study that we're actively working on now, and just update as to where we are. So we did put out requests for qualifications. We've had people submit, respond to that. That process is closed. We're actively reviewing. We'll whittle down the list of either the selected consultant or kind of the top consultants to bring back for a second round of interviewing. The latter, I said, is probably what's going to happen. It's typically what we always do is bring them in to interview. And then we'll execute the contract. And all the proposals are really running in a time frame as we kind of expected, which would put us having a document in place by the end of next year. And at that, we'll clearly identify funding. So it may say you can head X, but this is how much you have to allocate a year. Or it may say Y, this is how much you have to allocate. So it will give options of the best ways for us to be able to provide public service and then the cost associated with that. And then we're really asking for them to explore everything. Since we're not building on anything other than pretty much non-existent. we're looking at having them help come up with things that will specifically work for our jurisdiction. So we will have a lot of those answers at the end of next calendar year, which then can be built potentially into the following budget cycle and part of that conversation. So it should finished right, a few months before your following retreat. So not the retreat coming up, but the next retreat. And that's kind of how we're building it in, so we can build into that.
Councilmember Garamella?
Courtney, I want to piggyback what Vicky said about the ridership. I think this topic has been brought before. Go Carry has, on-demand transportation. Just Friday, I was coming out of work, and I saw this bus, and it was RTP on demand. And it was, I think, Triangle Transit or Go Triangle?
Go Triangle.
Go Triangle. I didn't see. So the thing I was thinking at the time is, wow, what is this service? Because RTP has on-demand service, and then Go Carry has it. I think what we need to do is, since I've talked to Laurie Bush before, is we have, West Carry and other Carry on the other side. We are pretty much sandwiched in between. If we work with them, so certain areas, I think they will be more than happy to partner with us to add, whatever the cost sharing is. And that way, the on-demand would come in the same way. First time in like almost 20 years, I saw this RTP on demand. I never saw that, title. And I was just going, wow, that's pretty cool.
And that's the purpose of the study, is who could serve us. I mean, granted, it could identify that we could provide our own. I doubt it, but say that's what it's identified. And we aren't partnering with anybody. We're now providing our own service, or it's who are we partnering with, which I suspect is probably more likely. But I'm open to learning what's going to come out of the study. And then if we are to partner, how much does it cost? I mean, because it's not just getting an existing bus to come over here, because then we're taking away demand that they're servicing already. It's, how many additional buses, how many additional staff, what is our subsidy that we, and all those will be defined, as part of this. I mean, there's a cost component to that, and then you work with those partners on the next steps. So that will come in time.
Mr. Howell had something to add, and then Councilmember Wendell, please.
Yeah. Just to clarify, to follow up on Councilmember Garamella's point, the Go Triangle, that is a relatively new service that they've offered, and it is just an RTP, and it's to address the lack of bus service in RTP, that the buses stop in one place, really. It's similar to Uber Lyft. There's an app that you call the bus up, and it's sort of geo-fenced into that area. We actually have been we've helped facilitate some conversations between RTP and Wake Tech to potentially expand that circulator at least down to Wake Tech, because we have some Wake Tech students who have tried to utilize transit to get to and from class. So that is happening. And then just wanted to clarify on Carrie's on-demand service. I'm not completely certain, but I think most of their on-demand service is still to special populations. It's not necessarily general public. You do have to qualify for their on-demand service, and it's a very expensive on-demand service that they operate. They have said that themselves.
Thank you. Councilmember Wendell?
So that may have mooted this point, but I guess what I was going to say is I understand the need for studies and things like that, but then when I think of what the cost is to do a study to determine whether or not we need busing and who's going to go from point A to point B, with us being a relatively small town, and because to Councilmember Garamella's statement about us being sort of sandwiched in and everybody around us has it, how difficult would it be to make a call, and I'm oversimplifying this probably, but to make a call to RTP and make a call to Carrie and say, hey guys, can we piggyback on what you're doing? Can you extend routes a couple miles into Morrisville on either side? How much would that cost us if we were going to do that, or what would that be? Even if that's just the interim until we, develop on our own. Again, I understand, a year and then another year after that, we're still like 2 years before we can get someone from point A to point B when everybody around us, it seems like, is riding a bus. And I mean, I know it's oversimplified, but I feel like I could get on the phone to whoever it is that's in charge over at Cary and whoever's in charge over at RTP and talk to them and say, can we have a co-agreement with you all to expand your service, what your existing service is, just go a few more miles this way and back. Is that
And
within
some of that
possibility?
we have been doing. I mean, to the point of being able to get Cary to come up, and pick up Park West. That is part of those conversations. Same thing, with Ben saying, we're having a conversation, how do we get Wake Tech students? So a fair amount of that is occurring, but there is a cost associated with it, and I don't want them to necessarily, okay, you can do this, but this is what you're going to pay to do that, when we can't say, well, you know what, our information says this is what it should cost us. And so part of it is us having sound information, and I think we may need more than just what potentially they can provide us. So some of that is definitely happening, and we've been doing it for years, but now we have to take it a step further because we've taken it as far as we're really able to take it through some of those conversations because some of the services are so expensive. And we were impacted, like we did have on-call service here, and it didn't much matter whether you were part of a special needs population or not. Well, suddenly we got classified as urban when it was redefined what kind of this rural urban service was. Spoken to the county before, and I'm like, is there any potential opportunity to redefine it yet again? And yeah, it is. So there are those conversations taking place, but I think in fairness to the citizens, part of it, I just don't want to pull a number out of the sky and say this is how much we need to allocate for it when we either would be horribly overfunding or underfunding. So we're doing what we can, but this is going to help put us in an educated, I think is the best way. There's a few companies around the country that specialize in this, and even Durham who has it, and Wake County, or excuse me, the city of Raleigh and Cary who has it. These same ones come on to redefine their routes very often and take a look at ridership and to do counts and to define, is the cost of what they're riding. Should they subsidize the cost? So this is what happens all the time. So even when you do have it, you can have your best guess, but you still bring these services on board to give you the right information, not probably what we think is our best guess, if that makes sense.
I think it does. So are you saying that the administrators of those programs in the other areas would not give us accurate information, or they would try to make a profit on us? Or
I don't think they would try to make a profit.
I'm trying to think of when you say pull a number out of the air.
For us, if they're saying in order to add, you would need a bus, you would need this many people, you would need to make this cost, we have nothing to, we're assuming they're giving us accurate information. But, if we're having to ask money, at least I'm making a suggestion, I want an educated guess of where I'm getting that. I want to back up. So if I have something that says it's going to cost X and they're saying it's X as well, I know that I'm, for the citizens of Morrisville, providing accurate information. And so that's where it's really important to make sure that we have the same information going to the table if you're particularly negotiating contracts and things along those lines. I don't want us to be at a disadvantage because we didn't have access to the same amount of information that somebody else had.
I hear that, and I'm kind of like, can't get unless you ask, though. So if we sort of already have asked them what they can provide, but I guess some on the council would like to see what it would take to accelerate the process, at least in the interim. So even if they're telling us something that they would be able to do in a certain amount of 6 months, say, I think some of us would like to maybe see that and then have the option to approve it, even if our study later will say we paid a little bit too much. We might still feel like it would have been worth it.
And that may be a conversation for the budget. We don't know the exact amount, but then do you start allocating in the budget now and then make appropriate adjustments once we find out? So you could talk about that conversation, particularly, do we now go ahead and set aside an allocation of money annually, even though we don't know what the right amount would be, and you could fund it with this one, it would get you partially ahead, but not significantly ahead, and then make the appropriate readjustments. That, is a much bigger conversation with this, but a lot of it is going to be dollars that would have to go behind it.
Councilmember Johnson, then Town Manager Page.
So this is a great conversation, and I think it's important to remember that our transit study will give us, as Courtney said, a really good amount of information to figure out what would be very effective for our residents. But in the meantime, while all of that's going on, and she talked about the study next year, and then going into that following retreat, we'll have data to really talk about. But in the meantime, Go Carry is servicing a portion of Morrisville, and so is Go Triangle. So there's that data, because there's a new route, a new Go Triangle route that's coming here through Morrisville at the same time as we're going to be doing our transit studies. So I think with that, we'll be able to gather real data as well to react to and to use. So we're not waiting 2 years for enhanced bus service. Enhanced bus service is coming and is planned to be here. So don't forget that. It's not enough. I would agree. I would totally agree. But it's at least it is coming, and we're working in the right direction.
Town Manager Page, please.
I'll just add that one of the thoughts that's occurred to me about information that may be helpful in an interim as we're capturing some data is allowing staff to maybe seek some real information from both Go Carry and Go Triangle about just the costs of service and how it works and what factors they use, just as a pre-learning experience, and how they make some of those decisions so that we can get better informed as we collect some of that data. So that's something that I think staff could put on our work plan just to capture that data to share with council to continue the discussion.
Councilmember Wendell, does that sound like a plan?
Yeah, I think that's great. And I agree. I do know there's some, there are some routes, which is a very nice thing, but it really is, it's almost just, if we could just, stretch a little bit more. So that's really what I was getting at. And I think the other thing would be just to look at the cost comparison for what the study is going to cost versus what, and if we had that side by side with the other, if the study was going to cost, X and our portion
is nominal compared to what the cost of implementing the program is going to be.
No, not implementing the program. I'm talking about asking for one of the other programs to just expand their routes to 3 or 4 or 5 more stops within the Morrisville area. That's all I was.
And we will continue advocating for that while we do. I think that is something we can commit to doing while doing the other, because the more the merrier when it comes to public transit.
Councilmember Garamella.
I think I agree with what Martha said, because when we ask, we are customers to Carry or, Triangle. So they should be able to give a number back to us, like instead of we guessing it. And if they want to service ours, let them give a number. And in the meantime, the transit study comes back, we can match up. But I think the burden of proof is on them to give us a dollar amount too, for how much they want to service us.
Okay, so that was good conversation. As far as I can tell, we're done with table 5.6, unless someone else had something else. Any general thoughts on that one? Okay, I'll pass it back to Ms. Tanner to move us on to the next agenda item.
Well, before we move on, I had 3 little quick carry-on. So,
right.
One just to add to now the general list, since we're no longer identifying timelines. The first one's monorail. So to explore the addition of a monorail service to Morrisville was put on the table to add as an item. So I'll turn that back over to the mayor for discussion.
Okay, Councilmember Schlink mentioned this as something that had been brought up in past discussions. And monorail, I guess, is different than light rail. And referred to Councilmember Wendell, if you want to just sort of briefly go through that and see what you think it should be in table 5.6.
Yeah, so the idea of the monorail specifically was to potentially partner with a lot of the larger corporations that have very large staffing. So, for example, the Cisco's and some of the other some of the biotech companies, to potentially have a parking structure near an off-ramp of a main thoroughfare that would be able to be the hub of a monorail. And when I say partner with, I mean literally partner with them for to fund it. But then that monorail system would be an above-road monorail that would potentially go to various stops across Morrisville, predominantly with major employers. So that would the buy-in for them would be it would free up their surface parking. So if they wanted to expand their buildings, they would be able to utilize a portion of their surface parking to do that. But it would also minimize the commuter traffic that comes through Morrisville for potential employees. I know it's a pretty hefty expense to do something like that. The towns that have done it have been very successful in reducing traffic in downtown areas, but I think more so for the partners, it's freeing up the real estate for them to physically expand, to use their surface parking to expand their operations. So that was the concept of it. So I don't think it would be a Morrisville proper. I think it would definitely be a partnership between multiple areas and potentially even RTP.
So I would sort of piggyback on that and say not limit it to monorail, but say explore park and ride options just in general. Because what you're talking about is a park and ride. Monorail is just the tool that gets people from the parking lot to the other. And it might be just an express bus service meets that same need at a lower cost. Would council support something like that? Because I don't think we really talk about park and ride very much. And I think that we do have dense areas for businesses, and the land is too valuable there to be used just for parking. Councilmember Schlink?
I would agree with that concept of park and ride too, because I think it's brought up before with RDU. And then, and park and decks too, I was going to add that one, but that would be separate. When we're finished with this one, then I have two others to maybe discuss.
Okay, I see people sort of cogitating on that. Can we get some general head nods to add one more item sort of in support of park and ride options into the future? Supporting the concept of park and rides. Councilmember Johnson?
Yeah, I think it needs to be generic, and I agree that a monorail is the solution. So you need to just kind of, at this point, we just have to address what the concern is, and then whatever the technology is in the future will be what it needs to be. I'm trying to figure out a different word than saying park and ride. That's my only. And I can't come up with something right now, but like.
Town Manager Page.
So I think staff can, try to find some words for you, but this is a great example of where we want to engage with our Morrisville Chamber of Commerce, especially as you've illustrated the proposed concept to help gather information for you to consider as a part of this comprehensive transportation plan.
And RTP, Mayor Pro Tem?
We could explore public and commercial parking options for, to reduce congestion within the town.
Sounds like that's some good language for staff to consider bringing forth. Okay, so that was the first of, Ms. Tanner, you said 3 items that we're revisiting at the end of the table 6?
That's correct. The next is to develop a policy for charging stations on both town and or private lots.
I see a lot of head nods. If staff could bring us back something toward that end, we'd appreciate it.
And the third is to explore on-demand service for public transit.
I'm also seeing head nods for that. Okay. Good conversations on all those items. Thank you very much. Councilmember Schlink.
Just 2 things, 3 maybe. The parking deck, I agree with them, and I think I brought it up before, but maybe a policy where we can maybe incentivize development to put in parking decks versus surface parking, because again, we're so limited. And I think we looked at it from a UDA standpoint before, but maybe this is the appropriate time or can dovetail what we just discussed.
Certainly, if everyone wants to explore adding that, I'm more than happy to.
With our limited land, I think anything that can do that in a aesthetically pleasing way is a positive. Councilmember Schlink?
And I think, should we address parking in this? I know recently we had a neighborhood that had trouble with parking. Is that something or is this too?
So the particular neighborhood that had issue parking was actually approved under the old code. So in the new UDO, we do not give credit for people parking in their garages anymore. So it used to be like 2.5 spaces, approximately. And so they'd say, okay, I have 2 in my garage, a half space in my driveway. We don't do that anymore. So if it's 2.5 spaces, I think it's like 2.25. So basically there's 2 spaces in the driveway that they get credit for. And if the driveway doesn't meet our parking widths, they can only get credit for 1. We don't give partial credit, if you will. It's either a whole space or no space. And then, so we're having overflow parking in our new. Several of those are being built. We have not received any complaints so far. But if we start to receive additional complaints, even though we're having on-street parking and overflow lots, we'll evaluate it. Everett Crossing has overflow on theirs, and that's a townhome project, and we have not received any complaints from them. We have a few more coming online as well. We'll retool if necessary and reevaluate and come up with new standards. I will say we have received a lot of negative feedback from our development community. It pops up over and over again, and I've explained to them at this time, I'm not even open to consider modifying it based off their concerns. Because at this point, they're being used. I drive through neighborhoods, I see that they're being used, and we're not receiving complaints anymore from those developments. So if they don't want it, they need to make their lots bigger to accommodate 4 spaces in their driveways. So those are kind of the conversations. It's like you can do something to solve this as well that we've had. So I think we should be okay for now, but we'll retool if necessary.
The last one would be scooters. Do we need to have something to address scooters?
Right now, it's going through legislation at the state to help define what a scooter is, because the current definition by state law does require a helmet and a license plate, and so it's currently making its way through legislation now. Last I read, they will probably put a Band-Aid in current state law for them and then go back and reevaluate again at the next session next year to figure out how to appropriately address.
And these are the ones I'm talking about, are the ones that you rent.
And those are the exact ones.
Right.
So technically, they should have a license and everybody should be wearing them, wearing a helmet and only using them on the road per state law right now. That's the current law, and it's being rewritten to kind of handle some items. I need to follow back up to see if the one outstanding issue, the deadline was last week with Raleigh, to see if that was addressed. And if it's not, I need to see if they're still going to allow them in Raleigh or not anymore.
So to be clear, they're not allowed on greenways by state law, so we don't need to be clear about that.
The speed that they can go under our current regulations prohibits them on greenways. So just like a regular scooter, we wouldn't allow on greenways because they get classified in that category by state law. They should only be on roads. Challenges, it is not safe for anyone on 54. So, and we've had some other challenges as well. When the scooters were here for a very short pilot program, a lot of the property owners did not want them in their sites either because of liability issues. So what makes us a little different is we have state roads, town roads, and then private development. Whereas if you look at downtown Raleigh, it's all interconnected by, public roads. So what was happening is some of our private developments are like, if these people fall, they're suing us. And we don't want them on our site. And they have the ability to basically say, you can't put your product on our site. So there was a host of other challenges. I've been working with this particular scooter company that was here. We're working through it. But no solution has been kind of surfaced quite yet. Because it's really, at the end of the day, we want people to be safe. And that's the most important.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anything else with table 4.6 then? 5.6. Councilmember Garamella, sorry.
Courtney, this is something I was thinking about. Last night I was driving on 54, and there was a bicyclist at 9 o'clock with just a small blinking light on, and I was having such a hard time. I would have just hit him without even. So, do we have any standards that in Morrisville to have more blinkers or something? Because I'm concerned when people drive, might be like they're coming back from work to their, gas station, just to a near place they're biking, but pitch dark with just a small blinking, it's prone for accidents.
I will have to speak to Chief Andrews. I do not know what equipment is or isn't required for cyclists. So that is a question that I will follow up with her on so that we can get y'all a response.
Okay. So moving on to the slide.
So moving on to item number 2, it's consider adding additional text in our recommendations related to safe routes to schools. This was provided at the October 9th work session. And there is a proposed policy recommendation on page 5.6, and there's also some additional text on page H2. So if you could just let us know if you think that the current policy on page 5.6 is adequate, as well as the text on H2 is adequate or not, or if additional changes are needed. Looking it up now, I don't remember off the top of my head.
The policy starts with the bolded language, advance the recommendations of the Active Kids Strategic Plan.
And it's on page 3 of the handout that we are just looking over as well, if that helps.
So it does reference the safe routes to school.
So is what we have adequate, or do we need additional information?
I'm seeing head nods that the info in there is adequate.
Okay, then moving.
The thing which I remember I asked about this particular point was more on the carpool lanes too. So
Address this. This was actually one of the mayor's comment back from the October 9th session. Your question, it's actually, we have it listed as policies that we're adding already to address not only stacking internal to the school site, but also making sure that it's not impacting the road, the turn lanes. We've already flagged that as a change to the code based off of consensus at the last work session. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to number 3, which is consider adding policy related to the creation of a town-owned and maintained coordinated traffic signal system. This was provided at the October 9th session, and then we have 2 little notes in here to help out as well, that we are currently participating in an ITS study with CAMPO and NCDOT, and that we do have funding for developing the coordinated signal in the STIP currently, and it's either going to end up as a Morrisville NCDOT carrier or some type of hybrid system. So we are actively working on this now, but the question is, should we add a policy for it? My apologies, but I cannot hear you.
policy as in what? Like,
Then table 5.6 that we finished talking about, is this something that you wanted to add to there, or is the fact that we're working on it now adequate?
For me, this is very important point for me, especially we are piggybacking off the Cary system, and NCDOT is also piggybacking off the Cary system. From my understanding, the previous council meetings, it's pretty much, is it working or not working? They really don't go into the signalization and the timing and all those things. So if we bring it under our umbrella, it will have much better control and with the flow of the traffic.
And we don't know if that's what's going to happen. So the funding that we have is studying to determine the best outcome. And it could be NCDOT takes over all of Morrisville. It could be Cary takes over all of Morrisville. It could be that Morrisville creates its own system, or it could be a hybrid system that talks to one another. So we don't know what, but we are studying it to determine the best option for Morrisville is what's currently taking place. And again, we're participating in a regional one with both Campo and NCDOT as well.
Do you feel, Courtney, like with our signal system and Cary signal system, the kind of service that we get is not the same, right? Because I think we don't pay them, or basically we pay them to just bring up and down. It's a kind of service that you are signed up with.
Well, if I could just interject myself, essentially right now we're deciding whether or not to put a policy in table 5.6, and this is all the discussion that's going to happen as part of the ongoing efforts that are happening. So I guess the question is, do we want to say continue advocating and supporting these studies to get to a better outcome? Would be my thing. So I think Councilmember Johnson also wanted to add a thought.
So I think we should add this. I think it's important enough that it should be somewhere in here so that we can all reference it, however you want to word it. I know you're all working on it, but I think it's important that it, for historical purposes even, that it be in here. And then when the decisions are made as to who, what, where, and when, we can update and it can be checked off. But it should wording. I think that it's important that the wording is in this document somewhere, wherever you think it fits.
Looking for head nods and assent of that. Yep. Okay. Yeah, if we can add that to table 5.6 as well. Thank you very much.
Then for the next item is discuss revisions to the proposed Greenway Connection Policies Program. This was provided October 9th work session. And there's two proposed policies that are on page 5-6. And a description of connectors is included in 4-6 if somebody kind of wants a description. So there are two policies in place to address this. The question is, are we okay with the language, or do we believe additional modifications are necessary? I think more than one person may have brought it up. I think that the connectors portion was specific to Councilmember Johnson, but I feel like more than one person kind of brought up concerns regarding kind of the connection policies. But I do know specifically what a connector is or is not. Councilmember Johnson asked for some clarity on that one.
See, this is why I like to do this all quickly, because I can't remember what I said back on October 9th. Here we are 2 months later.
And it really was dealing with, so currently we have new greenways that are being built from point A to point B, but then how do neighborhoods connect? So, and this is partly what the Greenway Connection Policy, I think, is really getting at, is, so does every neighborhood that builds has a connection, or is it their connections occur every quarter of a mile, every half a mile, every mile? So it may not be every neighborhood, or do, in some instances, if it's like the neighborhood, then the greenway, then the stream, you connect every single time. But then if it's a neighborhood stream greenway, because there are impacts to the streams with every crossing, then do you develop a pattern? That's what the heart of this is getting at. So the question is, what we have in place, is it adequate or not? Staff thinks that as it's written, it's fine. At this point, that we just need to go and develop the policy and then modify the code so that it's enforced.
And tell me, which two are you referencing in 5-6, Courtney?
That I'll have to look up again. I don't remember that off the top of my head. Or Ben can chime in.
Yeah. The one is near it's the third from the bottom on page 5-6 of the plan. strengthen language in section 5.8 of the UDO for pedestrian connectivity in new developments. And then further up on page 5-6, fifth down from the top, prioritize the construction of greenway connections between existing facilities and adjacent neighborhoods.
Councilmember Garamella?
Can we number these? Because, it's just for its ease. Otherwise, like fifth from the top, second from the bottom, and, it's kind of hard. If you can just, like, with the italic 1, 2, 3, 4, whichever ways, that at least you can reference it instead of saying 5, 6. There's so many guidelines.
I'm happy to discuss that, but if we do number, people suddenly think they're prioritized 1 through 20. There is a downside with adding a number.
Then ABCD, then, whichever.
Any type of ranking like that, there are assumptions made, not on purpose, often, but that it's prioritized. We are going to put them in alphabetical order. So if I say prioritize, to go look for the P's. But council can decide as a whole whether or not you want them labeled 1 through or A through. Just know there's a downside to that as well.
It's a good point, and you can clearly state it, and not in any certain order at the top too. It's just more for reading through and referencing any 1, 5, 6, section 4. That would be more appropriate.
Mayor Pro Tem, and then Councilmember Schlink.
I apologize in advance for going into the weeds, but I just have to ask this question. For the alphabetizing purpose, I'm picking on page 3. I see conduct an audit, advance the recommendations, and evaluate Church Street cross-section. So are we literally doing advance as the first, conduct as the second, and evaluate, although they could, the content themselves refer to a lot of different things, strategic plan, the Church Street.
Yes.
So,
if you have a MEN comp plan and AMEN are the first 4, they will be the first one on the list. And then technically you have advanced is probably in there. So AD would be first, then amend. So yes, it's the very first word, just like you would when you learn alphabetization in elementary school, we're going to use that concept. So, it's not going to be, and that was the takeaway I had from when we talked about it previously.
And I apologize for asking such a silly question. It's just, when I'm reading through the bicycle and pedestrian, I'm thinking topic. And it's fine for you to alphabetize as you at will. It's just thinking about that maybe in the future of how we, say those header statements might be. Not this version in 10 years.
It's going to be travel mode would be the first level of alphabetization, and then it's going to go into the second category. So you'll have all similar travel modes together, then A, B, C, D, then all, if that makes sense.
Councilmember Schlink, please.
You might consider whatever way you do it, just put a disclaimer on there on the page that says they're not based on a ranking or priority.
It's up to council.
I like the disclaimer, and I'm fine with the alphabetizing.
Okay.
But I agree. It's easier, though, when you're referring to it, to say, go to number 13 on page 6.
I am not going to disagree with that. I'm just going to reiterate, by default, people will rank, and that is my worry. I am more than happy to do it.
I'd use the alphabet instead of a number. That might help a little bit, although you could still think alphabetizing is a priority too, but numbers are worse.
And then add the disclaimer that Councilmember Garamella initially, so we're going to go through disclaimer and keep it alphabetized.
Okay, one more thing about labeling. I think if these tables are going to stand alone, I think it'd be nice to have a legend at the bottom of the page indicating the circle and the words associated with the circle. So you don't have to go to earlier in the chapter to know what each of the circles mean. And if there isn't room to have the circle and the words, maybe just the words and the corresponding color would be enough for people to say, okay, this was economic development, something like that. Just for readability.
If council desires, we can easily add a legend. That's not a difficult thing to do.
Anyone have a problem with that, or that sounds like that one's okay? So we have another 28 minutes assigned to this work session, so we're moving along.
Okay, and I'm going to go back to number 4.
Okay, so since number 4 was mine,
Okay.
and I did go through my notes. I think I had asked about greenway connections, and had we considered all that were possible, and how are we going to make sure that in the future we're connecting? And I think I just read these to you. You indicated, Ben, and I think those are fine. I think those are fine.
Okay, everyone else is good with that one? Okay, thank you. Moving on.
Okay, we're going to move to table,
And, okay.
my apologies, we're going to move to table 5.9 on the prioritization of the independent multi-use path projects. So if we want to move on to, I believe I handed each of you also the list associated with that. 5.9, unless I had a
Councilmember
typo.
Schlenk?
I'm looking at the table, so back to the, it's that, right?
Yes,
So
sir.
when you prioritize it, you're saying the top one is the number one priority?
It's not prioritized, so I will add a disclaimer
Oh, okay.
on that one too. This
I
is,
thought it says prioritization at the
and
top.
it's more the stars based. So if you look at the different stars, they have different weighted values.
Maybe a listing, or I'd change the word then.
Happy to discuss changing it however you so desire.
You give we're back to then how the people are going to look at that and how do you rank it? That's fine if you want to say the guiding principles, but then we're back to the discussion about, okay, can 2 outrank 3? Probably, but it depends on the situation. If you only had 2 of those guiding principles versus 3.
Okay, so council, would anyone like to weigh in on the idea of changing prioritization of independent multi-use path projects to just listing of independent multi-use projects, just for clarity? Or okay, everybody okay with that? Just Mayor Pro Tem.
I'm a little confused because we have a legend and we have stars, although we haven't had stars in these previous sections. But what are we proposing? Eliminating all the stars, or what is the issue?
The issue is just the title of the table. Instead of calling it Table 5.9, prioritization of independent multi-use paths, Councilman Schlimping got to the point that basically, is this the prioritization order? So 1, it's going to be changed to ABC order again, and 2, it's on the table right now. It's changing it from Table 5, or 5-9, I'm sorry, and just change it to independent multi-use path projects, and to strike prioritization of in the title heading.
That sounds good. It's just there's a lot of information on this thing, so.
Okay, seems like everyone's fine with changing the title, just for clarity. Councilmember Windle?
So, Courtney, is this whole chart is the performance of each of those, correct?
That is correct.
So why don't we just say performance of independent multi-use path projects?
Happy to change it however y'all want.
I mean, that's what it is the performance of it, right? So the performance.
So it's a staff assessment of each of those, unless we want to change any of the stars. I think generic is better in this case, rather than labeling it. Changing the number of stars, I mean, that's up to us if we wish to. Not that I'm recommending that.
We are using the stars as a informed measure to help us prioritize based on multitude of factors, including grants. So performance is a confusing term to me, even though I understand it. I think the public might not. if we just go generic here and then we understand how to use the stars when we get, the sidewalk policy updated, or if we get some LAP funding or get some other kind of funding?
I think there'll be a lot of factors when we actually go towards implementing and executing these projects, that they're all going to be kind of standalone. And this is just a good informational piece to get us started. Councilmember Johnson?
Get rid of the word prioritization up at the top of the page too, Courtney, if we're getting rid of it on the name of the chart.
I'll make
too.
sure we change it in multiple places.
Getting to the guts of the item itself, does anyone have any questions or suggestions on any of the particular items? And then we'll address the Breckenridge Loop last. Okay. So I guess that means that we're all okay with the number of stars associated with each of the things and the elements. How do you think we should go about the Breckenridge Loop assessments? I was okay with staff's recommendations of the 413, but looking for input at this time. Councilmember Schlink.
I'm happy with it. It's fine.
The Breckenridge Loop is the last item on this list, and according to this handout, the big one, there's some notes at the bottom where staff is making recommendations about connectivity being 4 stars, activity center served being 1 star, feasibility of construction being 3 stars, and that the funding partners being county, state, and private. So staff was looking for some input from us about those items. So I'll give everyone a moment to get to that point.
Mayor, could you have Courtney or somebody explain the rationale between the ratings on the Breckenridge Loop? Because I'm not as familiar with that rating.
Ms. Tanner, if you would, we'd appreciate it.
Certainly. So, sorry, I just shrink everything down to one page here. So for activity centers, and I'm going to kind of skip around here, but for activity centers, your activity centers, it doesn't connect to any. Activity centers are designed through zoning. And so that is why that is given 1 star, because it does not connect to any activity centers. But for connectivity, it does connect Parkside Elementary. It also will connect the future Wake County Public School. And it also is a future connection to RTP Greenway. So the fact that it's going to connect you to another entire greenway system as well as 2 public amenities, 1 under construction, 1 future, that is why staff was recommending that it have a total of 4 stars. And then we move on to the feasibility of construction. We put 3 stars. It's actually not very difficult to construct the portion of it along Little. And we have all the right-of-way to construct the Millicent extension. However, there is some bridge work and some design work that would go into there, so that's why it's not automatically kind of a 5. So that's why staff recommended a 3. It kind of sat in the middle. But again, that's staff's recommendation. You are welcome to modify it as necessary.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Councilmember Garamella and then Councilmember Schlink.
Courtney, when you say activity center, you mean by a community center, or what is the activity center?
No, we have regional activity centers, neighborhood activity centers. There are zoning designations.
Oh,
so, and it doesn't connect to any of those. It literally is connecting kind of to RTP and the Breckenridge neighborhood. So there's no direct connection to an activity center.
Okay, got it. I was thinking like a community center, like, so the school itself has, will have.
And that's why we gave it the high connectivity score, but then the very low activity center score.
Member Schlink.
Move on to another one. Not to just ask a question about it.
Can we just finish with Breckenridge Loop first? I had one last question. Staff has indicated county, state, and private, but most of the others stay state, federal, and private. Is there some difference? These other ones are not open for county
This one's actually located in the county's jurisdiction. That is why we wrote it that way, but we can also add state to it if you so desire.
I think any funds that we can get from anywhere is helpful. And just to be clear, we wouldn't get any county matching funds or anything for any of the other ones feasibly?
Not necessarily. It depends on what grant you're applying for and who's administering the grant. So it could be federal funds, but it's being administered through the county. So not necessarily. We can add Ware County to all these if you so desire as well.
Council, have any thoughts about that either way? Councilmember Johnson?
So I would say I wouldn't get really hung up on this. I think when funding becomes available, whatever, I mean, there might be funding we're not even thinking about that we're not listing here. And when it becomes available to us, we're going to run after it. So I'm not sure I understand, but I'm not sure I get real hung up on what's in each of these.
I agree with that assessment. Okay, so I think does staff have everything they need for the Breckenridge Loop item?
I have one question.
Okay,
Last one.
Councilmember Garamella.
As part of the subdivision plat, right, like we ask the builder to build the sidewalks in front of their property. So are they building sidewalks on the other side of Little Drive where the school is?
It's not our jurisdiction, so we had no legal authority to ask them to construct anything. And per the county plans, the greenway is on the north side. So the answer to your question is no. I do not believe that they are actually installing anything. If my memory of the plans is correct, no. The county has different regulations. So, and the way that it was seen is there's a greenway on the other side, so no sidewalk was necessary.
Okay, so Councilmember Schlenk, you had other items on that page?
The Kick Creek Greenways extension, that's the one that would connect it to Providence Place underneath the, is that what we're talking about? Or is that something like going underneath the toll road?
Ben, do you remember? I'm not staring at the appropriate section of the plan. I don't remember.
The Kid Creek Greenway is actually, it's a small piece of the town of Cary's Kid Creek Greenway, which comes up to the west of Lewis Stevens Road. They have a small portion of it currently constructed at the Carpenter Elementary School. In their Greenway plan, they would take that all the way up, well to the west of Lewis Stevens, but a small portion of it actually comes up on the edge of our jurisdiction and meets up with Lewis Stevens Road right at Parkside Valley at Northwest Park. And so we added that in because it is an extension of a Cary.
So it has nothing to do with Kids Creek neighborhood?
Correct.
Which doesn't have any greenways other than you might consider the one going back to Davis Drive sidewalk. Kind of like Breckenridge, they don't have any greenways.
Correct. Yeah, this is purely, and it's my understanding is it's called Kid Creek Greenway because that's Kid Creek back in there, and that's the name of the creek.
And we do have a follow-up item for Chapter 4 that was brought up from a previous meeting regarding future greenways. Both Kids Creek, Providence Place, Shallow, Glen Drive, all those were kind of captured in the previous comment.
The Sorrel Grove Lake Greenway, that's the one that, there's two sides to that, right? That's the reservoir that is on the one side, and they already have private because that's where Trinity Properties owns, and I've walked it. They're pretty extensive, but the other side doesn't have any greenways, right?
It has to do with that area. I don't know the exact location.
You're referring to the other side?
No, if you look on page 5-13 of the plan, figure 5.4 is the map, and Sorrel's Grove Lake Greenway actually runs between Aviation Parkway and Airport Boulevard.
Talking about, but you're saying it's private, and I'm thinking, isn't development going to build on the other side of there at one point, or that's Wake County land, so they won't?
Talking about to the north in the darker gray area on the map?
Well, I guess the proposed one. Oh, when you say that's the Sorry, that's the same as what I'm talking about when I talk about the extension, the 54 bypass extension. Isn't that the same?
Yeah, that's the greenway that runs at the very back of all those properties where we added some connections.
And this one is further up, the Sorrel one.
Sorrel one runs along basically Lake Crabtree area.
Yeah.
So it's on the south side of Airport. It's not the lake. That one's referred to as Mill Spring Greenway, the one that goes around the lake. The Sorrel Grove Lake Greenway, there's kind of two legs to it. One comes Factory Shops heading down, and the other one kind of comes off of Sorrel Grove Church Road on the south side of Airport all the way down to
Okay,
Aviation.
got
Does
it.
that
So
help?
we're saying private is going to pay for it because when development occurs, they'll do it like a regular greenway.
Most likely.
Okay. And then,
Councilmember
sorry.
Schlink, I will say, we'll double check. A lot of these proposed greenways came from the Parks and Rec master plan, the older one. And looking at it, we will double check and make sure that those names weren't transposed. And the Sorrel's Grove Lake and the Mill Spring,
Got it.
those labels may have been transposed. We'll double check and confirm.
Well, that's fine. I would like to get both of them. I just
Yeah.
don't know who will pay for Sorrel because it's Wake County, and I don't think there'll be any development around it.
It was meant to, I believe the way we show it is, the idea is it would be at the edge of that private property before you get into that Wake County property.
Councilmember Johnson?
I haven't looked at this map in a while online, and it's really hard to read, but these are all labeled on here, correct? Well, they're all labeled. The greenways are all labeled. It's just hard to read in a hard copy. Okay, that was a question. Okay, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Time check.
Yep, 12 minutes left. Thank you very much. Ms. Tanner?
So kind of two things. One, we can continue on with Chapter 5, or within the 10 minutes that we have left, we can go to an appendix and get to that point. Because we're at a good stopping point. We've really kind of finished off Table 5.9 right now, and before we get into the rest. But Mayor, I'm happy to do whichever one you choose.
5.8 is a pretty lengthy table, so I think that an appendix of your choice would probably be appropriate at this time, and I'm getting some head nods on that.
Okay, so I am going to move on to Appendix G, as in girl. Because I think we can get through this one in the time allotted.
So Appendix G is the technology appendix. It summarizes emerging transportation technology and includes a list of near-term planning strategies for Morrisville. As you can see here, this is one of the graphics from the appendix. Figure G1, opportunities and impacts of connected and autonomous vehicle technologies. There is no equivalent appendix from the 2009 plan, and the only question and comment was from the last work session.
If you can move back to the image of G1.
And actually, let me pull up the table.
So really, the image G1, does it capture everything? Well, there's actually a table associated with it, but it's table G1, it's capture everything that we believe needs to be captured with regard to smart technology options. And he is pulling that up now. So the person who this is most passionate for just gave me a thumbs up. So, but now if everybody else could really look at the table though and make sure that it appropriately captures everything.
And the text does talk about charging stations and stuff, so it is somewhat captured in this section, which is very nice. Councilmember Rao.
Well, I don't know whether we want to add it or not. Just a thought is I just want to know that we're open to, we used the word earlier, public-private partnerships or entities, and just any, private companies out there that have ideas or technologies that they could come and pilot in Morrisville. We talked about traffic signals, and I think that one thing that I would like to see is, data that there's probably data out there somewhere that DOT has of just estimated times, like what the time should be at the lights. And I wish that smart technology would actually allow citizens to get that information so that they would know when they're traveling, where's the areas in the town where they'll be at the stoplight the least amount of time. So maybe that's part of the DOT study, but I think those are the kinds of things that, we should at least be not advocating for, but making sure that Mayor Pro Tem used the word data and analytics, and I think that's how data is being used, just by citizens who would be able to get on a device and say, where am I what intersection? And Councilman Garamella has brought this point up. How many of us have been in traffic for a long time, sitting in the light sometimes for a few minutes? So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. I don't know what language we could use to reflect that, but
we've captured it in the policy that we're open to public, private, anything. This is getting more into details. I think we've already in some ways we've captured it in the policy statement, but if we need to make revisions here, completely open to doing some. My initial is I'm kind of at a loss to think of what to add. Not to say that there is anything to add, since this is kind of defining things, but I'm open to talking about.
we don't have to add anything now. I think it covers it. I just wanted to say that for the record, just to get us thinking about these kinds of things as we get strategic and we look at it. I mean, I think we use the word smart technology, so just to those ideas.
Thank you. Councilmember Windle?
Thank you. Would the park and commute potential rail system, monorail system, or other be included somewhere in this, Courtney,
I don't know if it's necessarily smart technology. The monorail portion would.
It would be unmanned.
But
yeah.
And I can't remember the exact terminology, Mayor Pro Tem Scroggins Johnson mentioned, but it could capture a bus service, though, and specifically where people park off-site at a remote location, bus then comes in and goes back. I don't know if that falls into this genre, whereas the monorail service would. Does that make sense?
Computer thing. Sorry. Sometimes when you're driving on the freeway, you see certain road 5 minutes away, 10 minutes away. You could do a similar thing with the buses arriving in 3 minutes or 2 minutes or 1 minute. That would be a technology advancement that is a companion to the park and ride.
Councilmember Garamella?
Courtney, about this park and ride, I remember that we had a discussion when there was a property next to HSNC that came up. The guy said they want to do a valet parking or park and ride in that context. What's the policy that we have right now? Because I don't want this to take a precedent saying, okay, you have this coming up, so we'll just have only 5 parking spots, depend on the others,
So current policy is there are certain uses that are allowed to do tandem parking. Like you'll see often hotels that use valet. They'll get credit through tandem because they can move one car to get to the other car. So those types of uses typically can get the tandem and valet parking credits. We have shared parking. We have off-site parking. There's a fair amount. We even have travel demand modeling that somebody can utilize. We don't quite have the densities here to do that, but it's in the code. In this particular instance, we would have to create a new section of the code that basically says your parking is met at this other location, and that they're basically then transported from point A to the on-site. So there'll be something a little bit different that would have to be drafted as part of that if one came along, since you're not going to meet your off-site parking needs on-site. Say a project required 1,000 parking spots, that 1,000 can be used elsewhere, so that way you can have 100% buildings on-site. It's just a change of code. It's in the realm of things, it's not a big issue from where I'm sitting.
Okay, so that sounds like something that might be good if we're going to try to encourage park and ride in the future, to sort of get our minds around the idea of having something really rough draft down the future. Other than that, are we all okay with Appendix G, as in girl, as written? I didn't really hear much that we want to change there. Okay, so you were correct. We were able to take care of that one. Maybe you can email us with plans for the next time we're going to address this. We'll take care of Table 5.8, whatever appendices are still remaining, what's still on the parking lot. I imagine that might be one of the meetings in January.
Town Manager Page and I haven't really worked out those details. We can, and I'm happy once we work out those details to put together a framework for moving forward as well. And I will say some of the additional items that we had to cover for Chapter 5, you actually already answered. Some of them had to do with defining near, mid and long, and if we've eliminated that. So I'll end up striking out some of the items that we were supposed to do anyway, though. So we've captured more than I think you even realized.
Okay, I don't think that we are eliminating those for 5.8, though, that table. Okay.
There's more 5.6 that's been kind of parked, but you've definitely captured some of that tonight.
Okay, unless someone else has some final thoughts on the transportation plan effort, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn this work session. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? None. That carries unanimously. We reconvene here at 6:30 for our regular scheduled meeting. Thank you all.